So I was on a DARPA call yesterday, and by invitation. So I'm going to discuss with you the open source, unclassified for reproduction portions of that call, and then dovetail into some analysis and opinion. You can go to sam.gov, sam.gov, and in the search bar, put in DARPA, DARPA, MASH, MASH, which is the Medics Autonomously Stopping Hemorrhage Program, the aim of which is to use robotics, AI, and machine learning to develop a device and a protocol to, on the front lines of battle, identify, locate, and treat non-compressible thorax hemorrhage, aka bleeders inside of the box, robotically. It's a very audacious goal. It's what they call a DARPA hard problem. So, during this 5-hour governmental Zoom call that I was on, I had a lot of key takeaways here. And so, hang with me. We're going to discuss timelines, large-scale combat operations, theaters of battle, implications for you who are watching this. And I wanted to go ahead and get this recorded and get this out because I think it's pertinent. And many of y'all have asked for it. I'm also there's going to be some things that I cannot say. And so I may point you in the right direction for you to do your own research. So first thing, takeaways. Item 1, there will be no telemedicine in the next conflict. The bandwidth will be contested, diminished, or non-existent. For those that don't know, telemedicine is on the front lines of battle, and now more and more so on the civilian side, EMS, and in rural hospital systems. Telemedicine is a tablet where the care provider in situ, the paramedic, the physician's assistant, the combat medic, when they're presented with a casualty who requires care that's outside of their scope, they dial up doc on the tablet. They go to their medical director. They say, this is what I'm looking at. And doc says, you need to do A, B, and C. And then doc walks them through it essentially via Zoom call. Although it can also be text only, it can be audio, but it's a way for the provider to talk back to higher to provide care in situ with the patient right here where they are that exceeds the scope of that care provider. It saved a lot of people's lives. It's allowed people with less training than required to perform medical interventions that are above their pay grade, literally and figuratively. But telemedicine requires infrastructure, specifically communications infrastructure. It's also targetable, and that's something that a lot of people miss, is that if you emanate a signal, that signal itself becomes targetable. And so you can vector fires onto your location because you're emanating a signal. Think of Ukraine and drone warfare here. I did a video about this on Patreon, emanation versus decimation. If you emanate, they will decimate. It's basically required watching on Patreon. And so the military-industrial complex believes in the next conflict there will be no telemedicine, because the bandwidth, the signals that are flying through the air, will be contested. They'll be jammed up. It'll be diminished. We won't have the ability to broadcast due to targeted attacks on infrastructure. It's just dog whistles for you, my civilian friends. Or the bandwidth will be non-existent. We won't be able to broadcast. Which brings us to point 2. There will be no golden hour due to contested airspace and long supply lines. The golden hour in Global War on Terror 66% of casualties treated within the first hour from point of injury to raised, elevated to definitive care, field hospital, whatever we might have. 66% increased survivability rate of the casualty. On the civilian medical side, it's a 97% increased survivability rate. So it's a big deal if we can get from the point of injury to definitive care in 60 minutes or less, aka the golden hour. We drastically increase the survivability of the patient. And all TRAFFICking protocols, tactical combat casualty care on the DoD law enforcement side, which spills over to civilian side, TECC, tactical emergency casualty care. All TRAFFICking protocols are built on the understanding of a golden hour, which during Global War on Terror, GWOT, we more or less had air superiority. We could move casualties as needed, and a lot of casualties got moved. And therefore, we had a unprecedented survivability rate for modern warfare during GWOT, taking nothing away from the people that did lose their lives or lost their limbs or their eyesight or lost their loved ones. But that was a statistical anomaly because we had the world's greatest fighting force fighting dudes in man dresses with AKs, more or less. This is not what the current Department of Defense, I know they've rebranded the Department of War. Well, their contracts still say DoD on them. So take that for what it is. It's not what the current Department of Defense, Department of War, estimates they are going to be engaged in the next conflict. There will be no golden hour, which means these TRAFFICking protocols are under review right now for best practices for large-scale combat operations, and we'll get to that in a moment. But I would encourage you to research and drill tourniquet conversions. That's a great place to start. Also, a resource that every one of you should be following, listening to. Go see Dennis at the Prolonged Field Care Podcast. Prolonged Field Care Podcast. Prolonged Field Care Podcast. It's a wealth of information, a phenomenal resource. They have a podcast, they have a YouTube channel, they have an excellent website. Go check them out and download the Deployed Medicine app on your telephone. So, point 2, there will be no golden hour due to contested airspace. Which brings us to point 3. The goal of this DARPA MASH program is to treat casualties as close to the front lines as possible and return those treated casualties back to the front lines to maintain combat power. Not necessarily elevate through the chain of care back to, if needed, back stateside to Walter Reed or wherever, but to treat in the field as close to the front lines as possible and recycle that soldier, sailor, airman, marine back to the front lines to maintain combat power. We're talking World War II, Korean War level conflict here. Point 4. There will not be enough whole blood products to include walking blood banks. A walking blood bank is if you have somebody in your unit that is a universal donor, or you pair up. I'm A positive, for example. So if there's other people in our group that I can receive blood from, we know that. So if you don't know what your blood type is, you can get an Eldon blood typing card. We actually sell them at refugemedical.com. Either you can find them other places, or you can go donate blood, which I recommend that you do. And they will tell you your blood type if you don't know what it is, for free. And you'll get a little glass of orange juice and a cookie out of the deal. And you might save somebody's life as well. But in the next conflict, they are already baking into the cake that there will not be enough whole blood product to include walking blood banks, living donors to donate blood. One of the points that was made during this call, and it is an excellent point that most people miss, is the further a patient degrades due to blood loss, the more requisite care on the back end to treat that patient. So we all know, or hopefully we all know, we want to stop bleeding as quickly as possible, especially extremity hemorrhage. It's easy. Brachial arteries in the arms, we've got femoral arteries in the legs, slap a tourniquet on it. Goes back to TRAFFICking golden hour versus prolonged field care, which is why we want to stop life-threatening bleeding now with Committee on TCCC recommended windlass tourniquets like the CAT or the Soft T. There's others, but I prefer the CAT and the Soft T. I have 2 Soft Ts on me right now. But if we're going to be more than a couple of hours, we want to know how to do a tourniquet conversion as well. But the more blood loss a patient experiences, the lower survivability rate, and the more medical attention they're going to need on the back end. So if you're in a resource-depleted environment, like large-scale combat operations, we want to stop bleeding as quickly as possible to maintain combat power and to increase survivability of the patient, which brings us back to this DARPA MASH program, medics autonomously stopping hemorrhage. And the whole thrust here is to robotically treat non-compressible thorax hemorrhage, internal bleeds. So there will not be enough whole blood products, which brings us to point 5. There will not be enough surgeons. There won't be enough surgeons to go around. And point 6, there won't be enough medics to go around. And so DARPA and the Department of Defense are looking at developing AI, machine learning, and robotics to augment surgical and medical capabilities, if not outright replace them on the front lines due to a lack of manpower. That's very interesting. Point 7, they're very specifically concerned about a 3-year window. We'll come back to that 3-year window in a minute. 3-year timeline from right now. I believe October 15th, abstracts have to be submitted for this program. So 3 years. Point 8, they're very specifically focused on Southeastern Asia, theater of war. Who is our near-peer threat in Southeast Asia? Okay. Point 9, they are very specifically focused on LSCO, large-scale combat operations, not fighting insurgencies, not regime change, not peacekeeping operations, not humanitarian aid, large-scale combat operations. I believe it was 2014, the Marine Corps announced that they were shifting focus to littoral combat. That means within 10 miles of the coasts, island hopping. Is it 10 miles? It's within a certain number of miles of the coast. And then the Marine Corps has been restructuring their force posture for the last decade for littoral combat. Also, at last check, there were somewhere around 235,000 Marines. In the last 18 months, DLA, Defense Logistics Agency, has purchased 1.1 to 1.4 million of everything. Everything. Toothbrushes, hygiene kits, boots, uniforms, rifles. 1.1 to 1.4 of everything. And if you're supposed to have 10 magazines, they purchased 14 million magazines. This is why, for a while, you could not find Marpat Woodland camo pattern cloth, Cordura cloth, ballistic nylon anywhere. And even Coyote Tan got hard to get for a while because DLA, Defense Logistics Agency, was buying up enough stuff to 4 or 5x the Marine Corps, or to replace stuff that's lost or damaged in battle. That's what we call an indicator. You also may have noticed that cases of MREs, which used to be $60, $70, $80, up to $120 a case for MREs, here recently have nosedived to $30 to $45 a case. It's because there's only so much room in the warehouses, and they're re-upping their inventory. That's what we call an indicator. So point 9, very particularly focused on large-scale combat operations, LSCO. Brings us to point 10, and this is a quote from a major who was on the call. Interesting fella. I won't tell you what his name is, but he said, quote, "God forbid this would be a whole of country effort." Talking about the United States of America. If this war comes to pass with a 0.7 very specific 3-year timeline, God forbid this would be a whole of country effort. Reminiscent of World War II. Which brings us to point 11. Again, this is my opinion and analysis, my observation from this 5-hour Zoom call for this DARPA MASH program. Point 11. Human and machine teaming is inevitable in the defense space. Right now, they're trying to integrate humans with machines. I believe it's just a matter of time where they integrate machines into humans. And that's something to be paying attention to, something to be sensitive to. But there are manpower and technical proficiency problems that the Department of Defense, the Department of War, okay, show me your DOD contract. Tell me what it says on it, okay? That the Department of Defense is trying to solve these manpower and technical proficiency problems in part by integrating technology. And they have a long history of doing that. The challenge there is, again, every signal that is emitted is targetable. And when we introduce complexity, we introduce failure points. I won't go too deep down that rabbit hole, but suffice to say, the more complex something becomes, the more vectors for attack that it has, the more failure points that it has. And especially with AI, we don't even understand how it works. We're not entirely convinced that it does work. It doesn't work reliably. So those are my 11 talking points and observations from this DARPA call, but it brings me to a couple of other things. This is Kevin Patton's Structure and Function of the Body for anybody who's working. It's a reference book. It's a textbook, and it's priced as a textbook. It's not inexpensive, but it's highly recommended. First is this 3-year timeline. I have, in the mouths of 2 or 3, let a thing be established. I have multiple witnesses on this 3-year timeline from a lot of different voices. I can tell you bits and pieces of this, but I will not tell you how I know. The people that make missiles, not just for big ships and airplanes, but think ground-launched, ground-based missile systems for aerial defense. For example, like Israel's Iron Dome. Those people have been strongly encouraged to greatly increase their production capability within the next 3 years, which dovetails into Trump's push for a golden dome for America. Gonna have a big golden dome. It's going to be very beautiful. Nothing's going to get through. So people should be asking the question, what is it specifically that we're worried about getting through the golden dome? Okay. Do research on that. Next point there is research China's island chain strategy. In between the United States and China, there's more or less running north and south. More or less north and south. There's no straight lines in nature. There are 3 island chains. If you're China, and looking east towards the west coast of America, California, Oregon, Washington State, going on north through there, through British Columbia and up into Alaska, there are 3 rows of island chains there. Those 3 rows of island chains, the United States maintains a military presence at. If you look at the Middle East, Bagram Air Force Base, for example, which the United States just took back. Why? Well, go due east from Bagram and tell me which country you end up at. Okay. So we, from a defense posture, are doing what we can to encircle the Chinese dragon. Diego Garcia, British Protectorate. Yeah, but the United States runs lots of operations out of Diego Garcia. Where's that located? Okay. So now think of China, and then work your way east across the Pacific Ocean, headed east towards the west coast of the United States of America. You run into 3 island chains. Those 3 island chains are used by the United States of America for logistical purposes to be able to project force into the South China Sea and elsewhere. So China has a plan, their 20,000 missile plan. Whether or not they can do it, analysts still argue the fine points of whether or not they can do it. They have a plan. That plan includes launching 20,000 missiles within the first 30 minutes of open war with the United States, targeting these 3 island chains and all of the military infrastructure, logistics, communications, berthing, stores, everything from class 1 supplies through class 9 supplies, all this stuff. To take those chess pieces off the chessboard. They also claim to and may have demonstrated the ability to hit the west coast of the United States of America with some of these missiles. Starts to change the calculus on what we need a Golden Dome for. Why do we need so many interceptor missiles? Because China has a plan to launch 20,000 offensive missiles within the first 30 minutes of this conflict. And will the Golden Dome be deployed just here at home, mainland United States, or will it also be deployed around the world at U.S. military bases? And many military bases already have surface-to-air defensive missile systems. Hopefully they work. Which then brings us to, if you go west coast of the United States, California, Oregon, Washington State, up into Canada, British Columbia, further north and west from there into Alaska. Now we're in Alaska, and you work your way west along that island chain, Aleutian Islands that run over towards Russia. Get about halfway through that island chain, you'll note there's an airstrip there that's meticulously maintained. Google Earth this. Fuel storage, all ports, the whole 9. Look at what color the roofs are with the aerial imagery. More than half of them are blue. And this is something that I'm going to go back to over and over again to see as the imagery updates, do more and more of these roofs become blue in the image. If you zoom now out from Aleutian Islands, west of Alaska, and start zooming in on some of these other island chain bases, look at what color the roofs are. I know, tinfoil hat time. Look at what color the roofs are. All right. Changes the mental calculus for what happened in Maui, which is part of Hawaii, which is part of the 3rd island chain, which is part of China's 20,000 missile plan, which is part of large-scale combat operations in the South China Sea, which is part of what DARPA is trying to fix or address with this MASH program, medics autonomously stopping hemorrhage. Now, they're all little bits and pieces here. We could weave all these little pieces together and make it say whatever we want them to say. But I find it all incredibly curious that everywhere I look, there's an emphasis on a 3-year timeline. Defense contractors, procurement, training needs, technological development, implementation. It's all 3-year timeline, including Golden Dome. I find it very interesting that the focus has been, from a TRIC standpoint, moving out of TRIC and moving into prolonged field care for about the last year. So much so that the Committee on TCCC has constituted and will be updating their prolonged field care protocols, going back to Deployed Medicine app, going back to Dennis at the Prolonged Field Care podcast. These are resources for you as a civilian who is observing this. And now I cannot say with certainty, in 3 years, we are going to go to war with China. But I can say with high confidence, high likelihood, that all the indicators point to, in 3 years, we're going to war with China. At the very least, our Department of Defense believes it is going to have to fight China in an island hopping campaign and on the mainland in large-scale combat operations within 3 years. So how do we adequately prepare for that? All that to say this. Step 1, don't be where the problem is. Step 2, this channel is called Bear Independent for a reason. The system is broken and fragile. And when it collapses, I don't want to collapse with it. So I want to be independent of this broken, fragile system, which is what we mean when we say do the things. So if we think about Abraham Maslow and his basic requirements for humanity, air, water, food, shelter, to include clothing, sleep, and reproduction. Air. Air is not, it's, yeah, Bear, the rule of threes. It's 3 seconds without hope. What does Pastor Joe say? He's good. I've seen a lot of hopeless people who are still alive. Yeah. It's 3 minutes without air. Air is not just the air that's in this room that we're breathing. CBRNE, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and environmental. And chemical is your area study. Look at your geography. What are the hazmat routes in your area? Where are the chemical plants? Where are the businesses and industry that are using chemicals around you? Prevailing directions of wind, water sources that could be contaminated by these chemical spills. Hurricane Helene in the Nolichucky River, anyone? Okay. Chemical, biological. Biological could be biological agents. This could be ricin attacks. We've seen that in years past. Anthrax attacks. It could also be screwworm coming across the southern border. It could be Lone Star ticks dropped out of black government helicopters carrying alpha-gal in certain regions, Lyme disease in Plum Island. Biological threats, to include our food sources and our water sources, okay, and our air sources, back to that, chemtrails and heavy metals and all that. Biological threats. Radiological. This isn't just nuclear bombs exploding. It's the somewhere around 100 nuclear plants that we have in the United States of America that produce somewhere around 20% of the power that we consume on the daily, that are relatively easy to target. They're big targets. And going back to air defense systems, Okay. How one would target them is outside of the scope of this conversation. That's literal terrorist stuff, and I'm not going to talk about that on YouTube. Radiological, nuclear bombs going off. Then environmental hazards, pandemics, diseases, etc. So gas mask stuff, or don't be where the problem is. Air, water. What are your water sources and what is your redundancy for water? And how are you going to boil, filter, and purify water? And remember, boiling requires fuel. Fuel is a consumable. So how much fuel for boiling do you have? Whether that's firewood or propane or diesel fuel or number 2 fuel oil or electricity on your hot plate with your solar array and battery backup, whatever it might be. Okay. You need lots of water. 3 gallons of water per person per day. 1 to drink, 1 to wash your dirty body with, 1 to wash your tools and clean your food or cook your food with, because most prepper food is dehydrated and or freeze-dried. So it requires water to cook it. So it's 3 gallons of water per person per day, not 1 gallon. And that has been proven out with the 55 plus Grindstone Ministries deployments that we've done in the last 5 years in austere environments without electricity, without cell service, without water, without food, without fuel, bringing in everything that we need. It's 3 gallons of water per person per day. And then you need multiple water sources, however, wherever you can get it. As I sit here on this property right here, there are 11 different water sources on property. And I'm still not 100% comfortable with our water plans. Okay? Because there's always room for improvement. Constantly improve your position. Food. Long-term food storage and the ability to produce more. Lots of videos on that here. Lots of other, check out homesteading videos and gardening videos. No, there's lots of resources for that. The basic number here is 3,200 calories per person per day. That equates to about 2 pounds of nutrient-dense food per person per day. Because of the 15 different studies I've crunched the numbers on, it's 3,218.22 calories per person per day for a military-aged male engaged in strenuous activity to not lose muscle mass. And I would submit to you that you're going to be engaged in strenuous activity when the balloon goes up. And I treat all individuals as military-aged males because even if they're not, that gives me a little bit of headroom in my food stores. So, shelter. Shelter is not just 4 walls and a roof, although that's great. It begins with the clothing that you wear. Most people mess up foot care and footwear. So get redundancy for foot care and footwear. And then have real clothes. This is harder to skin. It's a harder cat to skin for children because they grow. But that's one of the benefits of having a team of people, a like-minded community, because you can share clothes around children as they grow. There's several children here in our community that will go to church and I'll see some kid wearing a shirt that I'm like, that's the 5th kid in the last 3 years that I know of that's worn that shirt. Because as they grow up, they just pass them around to the different kids, right? So if you have the bandwidth to store clothes, to kind of be your own goodwill, if you will, and I mean that genuinely, to have an inventory of clothing, or you have the ability to sew and you have fabric, that's good. Also, rags from a medical standpoint are good to go. Clean cloth is good to go. That's gauze, that's dressings, it's 1,000 different things. And also from a sanitation standpoint, having spare cloth, good to go. So shelter. Again, we don't want to be where the problems are going to be. All this goes back to area study. Mike Shelby at Forward Observer has done phenomenal pieces of content on how to do an area study. I have a standalone video on it in the Prepper Classroom here at the Bear Independent YouTube channel. You should absolutely be doing that. So then brings us to sleep. When I was at Kentucky Sustainable Living, the premise of my talk was, if we were 48 hours into the event, the balloon has gone up, could you take a nap? And if the answer is no, then you're not adequately prepared. Inadequate sleep has the same effects upon the body as inebriation, intoxication from alcohol. It affects your decision-making process. It also there's two predominant hormones when it comes to hunger. One is ghrelin, the other is leptin. And when you don't get enough sleep, you overproduce ghrelin and you don't produce enough leptin. Ghrelin makes you hungry and leptin makes you feel full. So the less sleep you get, the more calories you will eat, which goes back to food storage. Okay? So if we are fighting for our lives, literally or figuratively, we want to be as well rested as possible. And so it's not just sleep, it's sleep kit, and it's creating an environment where one can sleep, which in large part goes back to network effect. Having people around you that you trust, making sure that you are safe, both of which contribute to the last of Abraham Maslow's foundational needs, which is reproduction. And I bring this up because I get this question all the time about, Bear, we're a young couple, we're thinking about having kids. Should we really be trying to raise kids in 2025 as the world spirals out of control? Yeah, you should. Number one, it's the first command in the Bible, be fruitful and multiply. Number two, I was not a fully actualized male until I had children. There were latent, dormant genes in my DNA that were activated once I had children. You don't know what love is till you got kids, man. And if you can't have kids, then adopt. And if you can't adopt, then pseudo-adopt. Take somebody under your wing and raise them up in the way that they should go. But having somebody else that you can pour into, somebody else that you're responsible for, changes your worldview from just me to, oh, now I'm responsible for these other people too. And then the third point here is none of this is guaranteed. We may not go to war with China in 3 years. We may not have civil unrest or an EMP or a catastrophic pole shift or insert external stimulus here. But you'll have your children. And you'll have a family that you love and that you provide for that gives you purpose and meaning. So yeah, you should do those things. So it's weird. And I felt compelled to make this video for y'all to enumerate these things that I've been seeing. Not to fearmonger, but to spur you to action. I would also add in here, we have experienced during times of global conflict, medical components become scarce. They're hard to get. I had a defense contractor called me yesterday and wanted to know if I had gotten my gauze machine yet. I said, no, sir, I'm working on it. He said, good, you let me know what you do. Earlier in the week, I quoted 5,000 tourniquets for an organization. Earlier in the week before that, I quoted 800 kits to a unit. Orders are already increasing, and globally around the world. And scarcity breeds value. And so we know from the Ukraine war, we know from October 7th and Israel and Hamas, every time there's external stimuli like this, medical components get very hard to get. So if you don't have what you need, consider visiting refugemedical.com. If there's something you need that's not on the website, if it's a medical component on Earth, I can get it. Just because it's not listed on the website doesn't mean that I can't get it or that I don't have it. So call the store, shoot us an email, use the chat function on the website. We'd be happy to help you. If you have questions about anything, again, just reach out to us. And then lastly, train. Train while you can. There's 4 hours of free content. 4 hours of free content on the training tab, refugemedical.com. The entire S-March E trauma playlist is on there. Walk you through all of that. We have There's virtual webinars on there for at-home training. There are public classes, including October 26th, 27th. Responder 3 class, scenario-based, stress-induced training. And then Train the Trainers, November 9th through 11th, 2025, here in Oklahoma. There are other classes on the road as well. Just hit the training tab. And then we have, thus far, in 2026, 11 weeks of private classes already on the books. So train while you can. You'll hear a lot of people say, take a Stop the Bleed class. Yeah. Most Stop the Bleed classes, the tourniquet doesn't even come out of the wrapper. So in all the things that you do, whether it's lifting or running or rucking or pistol or carbine or long gun or TCCC or whatever it is that you're training, train hard. Because you will fight the way you train. And if your training sucks, your fighting will suck. And I hope that we never have to fight. But to quote a major, God forbid this will be a whole of country effort. So, no fear, do the things, be the light. I appreciate y'all very much. Please share this with somebody. That's the only way the channel grows. I'll see y'all when I see you.